The trucking industry has faced a downturn due to overcapacity, lower freight rates, and driver shortages, leading to financial strain for both trucking companies and drivers. Specifically, an influx of new carriers during the freight boom resulted in an oversupply of trucks, driving down rates. This, coupled with rising costs and a shortage of drivers, has made it difficult for many companies to remain profitable. Factors contributing to the downturn: oversaturated market. Many new carriers expanded their fleets during the freight boom, but demand has normalized, leaving more trucks on the road than there are loads to haul. Lower freight rates. The oversupply of trucks has led to lower freight rates, making it more challenging for companies to stay profitable, says Empor Trucking. Driver shortages. A shortage of qualified truck drivers is exacerbating the problem as companies struggle to find enough people to fill their trucks. Rising costs. Trucking companies are facing higher costs for fuel, insurance, and other expenses, which further squeeze profit margins. Economic downturn. A general economic downturn can also impact the trucking industry, as businesses may reduce their freight shipments. Consequences for the industry company bankruptcies. Many trucking companies have filed for bankruptcy due to financial difficulties, notes The Street. Driver turnover. Drivers are leaving the industry in search of better pay and working conditions, according to Workhound. Trucking companies may be forced to reduce their service offerings or increase delivery times due to the shortage of drivers and lower profitability. Some predict that the trucking industry will eventually stabilize as the overcapacity is addressed and demand recovers, according to a post by FreightWaves. Others believe that the industry will continue to face challenges as it navigates the changing economic landscape and addresses the driver shortage. Let everyone know in the comments what you Homo sapiens and screen zombies think, and subscribe, follow, share, like, and pour some sugar on me for fast-to-the-point news and information daily. Now back to the main story, kids. The earliest days of the American long-haul trucking industry better paralleled the stagecoach industry than trucking of today. West of the Mississippi, there were no highways. Routes were indirect, and service stations were few and far between. The roads were rural, and the trucks were rudimentary, traveling at speeds that topped out at 40 miles per hour and experiencing constant malfunctions like tire blowouts and engines overheating. As World War I loomed, the movement of military supplies became critical to American participation, and railroads couldn't handle it alone. So industry advancements occurred quickly. Fifth wheels were introduced to trucks, which standardized their size. Diesel engines ushered in a new era of efficiency with 25 to 30% more miles per gallon. And pneumatic tires decreased damage to both the trucks and the goods they carried. By 1920, there were 1 million trucks on America's roads. As technology evolved and infrastructure improved, the industry around it did too. And the government needed to catch up. To do this, the Interstate Commerce Act was amended with the Motor Carrier Act of 1935, largely spearheaded by the railroad industry, which was losing business to what they considered an unregulated transportation market in trucking. Key pieces of the legislation standardized trucking rates and required companies to have certificates. Companies previously in operation like Alco were grandfathered in and automatically awarded a certificate, making it very difficult for any new carriers to enter the market. The United Parcel Service, which started in Seattle in 1907 with deliveries on foot and bicycle, ultimately benefited from this legislation. When the company was founded, it specialized in retail deliveries exclusively in Seattle and eventually in Oakland, California. But as it expanded to here and here and here, introducing consolidated carrier shipping, it eventually fell into the jurisdiction of the ICC. So, when the 1935 Act was introduced, UPS had a unique grasp on several key markets in the United States, and it held on to that tightly over the decades when others couldn't directly compete. Additionally, rate bureaus were set up to standardize regional transport costs and to restrict what a truck could actually carry. Paralleling similar regulations in the rail industry, truckers were told what they could carry, where they could carry it, and how much they could charge for that service. So, this farmer in Florida, for example, was allowed to transport their own fruits and vegetables to Cincinnati, Ohio, but could not carry alcohol from a company in Covington, Ohio, back to Florida because he wasn't permitted to take loads for hire. and as a produce carrier, he was not allowed to transport alcohol. What started as a way to control the market and even the playing field to the benefit of both drivers and companies ultimately made trucking more expensive for the consumer. Freight rates were an estimated 1/3 to half higher due to the regulations. Frustrations mounted, but then everything changed in the era of deregulation. The Motor Carrier Act of 1980 represented an almost full repeal of all regulations set more than 4 decades earlier. Now, truckers could drive where they wanted, transporting what they wanted, and charging more or less for it. And new carriers could enter the market with essentially unfettered access, and a new era in American trucking was born. Workers flocked to the industry. The number of truckers nearly doubled between 1977 and 1996, from 1.1 million to 1.9 million. At the same time, the number of distinct trucking companies also quickly grew, from around 20,000 in 1980 to more than 500,000 in 2024. The floodgates opened on the industry, and while it was awash in labor and employment options, the sharp increase in competition led to lower wages and a loss in union power. Though consumers and companies benefited from cheaper prices and an explosive growth market, it all came at a cost to one party in particular, the drivers. In this flooded, lightly regulated post-1980 reality, there exists a fundamental and unshakable paradox. Trucking has never been so in demand in the US, and yet it has never been such a bad job. Trucking can be classified in a few different ways, by distance from local to long haul by load, from fracking sands for oil fields to consumer goods from warehouses by carrier, from one-person operation to a slip-seat fleet or by license, CDL Class A, B, or C. But to understand what happened to the job itself, it's best to consider how a trucker of any classification files their taxes, whether they're getting a 1099 or a W-2. In 2022, there were a total of 3.5 million truckers in the US. Of that, 1.7 million, or nearly half, were owner-operators. That means they're truckers in the most mythologized Wild West style imaginable. They own and maintain their rigs, they make their own schedules and carry what they want to when they want to. They're their own boss, or at least in theory. Today, trucks are prohibitively expensive and consumer demands are greater than ever. Precision and speed in logistics are no longer add-on benefits, they're assumed qualities. So, of the 1.7 million owner-operators, only 44% actually drive under their own direct authority, while 45% lease their time to a motor carrier company. This means 765,000 truckers, or over 20% of the entire workforce, call themselves owner-operators or independent contractors, but are working directly with a logistics company, capable of coordinating the demanding and complicated delivery network while providing the containers, chassis, and sometimes even the trucks to get the deliveries done. And here, the lines get blurred and truckers often lose out. Take Expo Logistics, for example. Their business model relies on an asset-light approach, where short-distance trucking is largely taken care of by independent contractors. This affords the company flexibility as it can hire on and cut its fleets with less red tape. But more importantly, this saves the company a ton of money. Expo Logistics doesn't have to pay for any benefits. They don't have to insure, maintain, or even pay for the gas for the trucks they're relying on. They just have to cover an agreed-upon hourly or per-mile fee with the driver. In many ways, this represents the opposite of the Walmart approach. One invests in employees and provides benefits to maintain a steady, well-trained driver base. The other keeps their commitments to drivers minimal under the assumption that there will always be a strong supply of independent individual operators. Both are effectively responses to the industry's post-1980 reality that anyone can enter the business as an owner-operator so long as they can secure a CDL. The downsides of the leased-out independent contractor approach are most acutely felt in America's largest ports. Driving cargo freight from a boat in Long Beach Harbor to a warehouse somewhere east of LA as an independent contractor, for instance, is nothing short of a bad job. Average port traffic is usually an hour plus. Navigating the port can be difficult. Getting in the wrong queue can result in hours of additional delay. Bathrooms can be hard to find, and all the time a trucker is sitting, waiting, and burning fuel. They aren't getting paid. During the co-fueled consumer boom where docks and ports were making daily news because of stacking delays, drivers were waiting up to 6 hours to pick up their freight. At which point, they'd get turned around at the docks because they wouldn't be able to deliver within the 11-hour driving window. A workday with expenses but no pay. While traffic has normalized since, the job hardly produced a living wage before the pandemic for an independent contractor with costs factored in. This 2019 California Berkeley study put the median income for a port driver at just $28,000 a year. Brutal for a job that almost certainly far exceeds the standard 40-hour work week. For a decade now, labor groups, the Teamsters, drivers, and lawyers, have been questioning the notion as to whether it's even fair to call these employees independent contractors to begin with. Their work for companies like Expo, after all, with rigorous and specific requirements with truck tracking and Expo-owned chassis, doesn't seem so independent, they argue. Recently, courts have come to agree, and legislators have worked to address this. But beyond the settlements that XPO has paid out over misclassification or the attention it has garnered from the federal government, perhaps the clearest indicator that much of independent trucking has turned into just a flat-out bad job is the turnover. Trucking has a staggering 90% turnover rate at large long-haul carriers. 90% of drivers leave a given company within a given year. So, while legally dubious to outright illegal misclassification explains some of the industry's issues, it's more structural than that. Far from the California coast and deep in West Texas is the Peran Basin, the very heart of America's boom-bust oil and fracking industry. Generally, the oil industry requires a lot of sand, which requires a lot of trucks to move sand from mine to rig. And within this A to B process appears a clear misalignment in incentives between truck drivers and truck employers. As the job postings suggest, employers need a lot more truckers in the basin. And for their part, they're offering staggering pay ranges. Some listed at $25,000 a month or $9,000 a week. But those numbers are rough estimations under the most generous interpretation. Looking at more details, IBS Teams, for example, infers that a driver could make $1,200 a day. So, in theory, they could get close to pulling $8,500 in a particularly productive week. That's, of course, a massive number and one that doesn't take into consideration any externalities of the cost burden on the driver. It doesn't need to factor in externalities, though. In fact, the company posting the job is under no obligation to provide an accurate salary because they're looking for independent contractors or drivers who are their own bosses. They're just posting an upper range for a particularly productive driver on a particularly productive week. But it turns out that Peran Basin truckers aren't clearing $25,000 a month. They're protesting. In the summer of 2024, they started blocking entrances to sand mines to stop traffic and hand out flyers. It was a grassroots revolution over working conditions. There are no restrooms at the mines or the oil fields. And more important to truckers' bottom line, they're getting stuck in way too many traffic jams. They're waiting 2 to 24 uncompensated hours to drop their loads off at wellheads or pick up their loads at the mine. They aren't pulling six figures. They're barely scraping by. In such a massive boom-bust economy that is the Peran Basin, there just isn't the infrastructure nor organization to ensure that truck operations go smoothly. So, there's no way to run enough loads or accumulate enough mileage to really make the economics work, but there's also really no incentive to fix it either. Oil companies, the mines, and the third-party logistics companies can just bring in more owner-operators, and from their perspective, a line of waiting trucks means that the oil field's demands are being met. Should a discontented driver flee for greener pastures, another driver with a CDL and a 30-year-old second-hand truck, bolstered by self-belief and a big number in a job listing, will replace them. Given the complaints of truck drivers that the uncompensated lines they sit in have never been longer, and that the resources available to truckers have never been more strained, it seems odd that there's a trucking shortage in the US, and that this trucking shortage is only getting worse. The heavy competition for good jobs, along with the prevalence of wage-deflating misclassification, the high turnover, and the general dissatisfaction with the job, suggests that perhaps there's actually only a lack in decent trucking jobs. But not all would agree, as the explanation of the shortage differs dramatically depending on who you talk to or where you get your news. But what's inarguable is that change, equal parts inevitable and revolutionary, is on the horizon. In late 2024, the Peran Basin marked a milestone for autonomous trucking with the commercial launch of 2 fully driverless sand-hauling trucks running routes along quiet private roads. Not far behind, a rival company has set its sights on fully autonomous trucking back and forth between Houston and Dallas, starting in April 2025. With the upside so glaringly obvious with automation, the cost savings, the heightened efficiency, even the potential step up in safety, trucking is destined to go driverless in the near future. But that future won't replace the current realities overnight. Automation will progress incrementally through fits and starts, while trucking will remain a narrowing occupation. As that occurs, what remains to be seen is whether the industry is able to maintain and expand the share of good-paying fleet jobs and the sliver of profitable owner-operator setups, or if the specter of automation only furthers the worsening conditions of the industry. That much remains a very human question. Hope you learned something today. Now set down your phone and go outside and experience a screen-free life.